Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me this evening for this important conversation on COVID-19 and back to school. If you have a question for me or our panelists, please type it in the QA section, and we'll do our best to answer over the course of the discussion. COVID-19 has caused widespread challenges throughout our state and across the country, especially for children and families. Students, families, teachers, and staff are under considerable stress and facing uncertainty about the upcoming school year. Today, I'm joined by experts from across Northern Illinois to provide practical tools and resources for parents during this incredibly difficult time. The webinar tonight will be broken down into a few different discussions: online learning, emotional and physical health of students and parents, childcare resources and community support, and an update on COVID-19. Additionally, I'm excited to share that my office has put together a page on my website full of activities, tools, games, and information that can be used by parents and teachers to support lesson plans or supplement online learning. Now let's get started with our discussion on online learning. Students across the district started the school year doing distance or remote learning, and most school districts are not sure when they'll have an option to return for in-person instruction. That's why it's important that we equip parents and teachers with the tools and techniques so that students can thrive during these virtual learning situations. For this discussion, I'll be joined by Joanne Martin, a Naperville parent and director of online learning at DePaul University, and Amy Biancheri, a middle school language arts teacher at the John C. Dunham STEM School in Aurora. I'd like to hand it over to Joanne and Amy. Can you please share a few initial thoughts of how parents can support students and teachers during online learning situations? Let's do Joanne first.
Sure. Hi, I'm Joanne. I, as was mentioned, am a director of online learning at DePaul University. I've been in educational technology for over 20 years. I also currently have a third grader and a sixth grader doing all online learning. So I see it from lots of different aspects and angles. And I've actually gone back to school myself. So I'm on all sides of this virtual proverbial desk. That one of the things that I come across most in the conversations that I have is that online learning is new to most of us, but it's not new. That it's been around for decades, and we have a lot of research behind it of what are some research-based best practices on how to do it. What happened in the spring was we had to do such a quick shift to make education continuous that it was remote crisis teaching. This fall, we get the chance to really implement some of the best practices in online learning. And we have educators in Illinois who are so dedicated to teaching your children that this is what they do and who they are at heart. That we've gone through this in a way we know how to teach. We're just changed modality. So the number one piece of advice I give everyone for everything now is to have some grace for the teachers who are figuring this out, for your students or your children who've never been online students before. This is new to them too. And for yourself. There's a lot to take on in being a parent in COVID and juggling it all. That to be kind to ourselves is probably the best thing we can do in regards to online learning and everything. Amy?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm Amy. What Joanne said about the spring versus now is really clear to me too. So I teach middle school language arts and social studies to eighth graders. And for most of my career, I taught high school. And in the spring, it was crisis teaching and crisis learning. And we've been calling it remote learning 2.0 now. But the biggest shift that I've seen in the 3 weeks we've been back at school is that kids are here and they're ready to learn and they want a sense of normalcy. They want to be with their friends. They want to have a teacher that cares about them, consistency. So the biggest piece of advice, I wrote down a couple of things, but be there for your kids, but don't do it for them. Try to give them the tools that they can use to be successful. Help set up systems and spaces that support them, and then let them take ownership of their learning as much as possible. And definitely communicate with your teachers. Encourage your kids to communicate with with their teachers, and never be afraid to reach out, because we would rather know and be able to help and figure out what works best for your children than not know and be guessing why they're struggling. So there are a lot of positives I've seen this year compared to the spring, and I'm excited about our new, our brave new world of learning, I suppose.
Well, thank you both so much. We've had a few questions that have been submitted during registration that I'd like to get into. So first, how do you recommend supporting our youngest elementary students, right? So kindergarten through second grade in a virtual learning environment.
So I know I teach middle grade level and Joanne is higher ed, but we both have a lot of experience both with our own children, and also there are a lot of colleagues that I work with at the Illinois Education Association who are younger childhood teachers. And I want to start with a very brief story. My sister has a 6-year-old who is in first grade this year, and she sent a video of her in her Zoom class from today with a horse that she was like dangling in front of the camera, dangling in front of the camera. And my sister sent this message saying, "The disruptive student streak continues into first grade." And I responded, "Oh my gosh, that is not disruptive behavior. That is God tier, absolute wonderful self-regulation where this kid is doing something to like keep her hands busy, keep her physically okay, and she is focused on that class." So I think one of the biggest things that parents, especially when you're seeing this in this remote learning environment where kids have to be in front of screens and they're little and they're having to pay attention, and it's hard enough in the best of times, right? That having positive feedback for good remote learning behavior is really important, and recognizing like, hey, you hung in there and you had some hard problems and it was hard to pay attention for that long and you did it. Catching them being good, catching them doing those like positive learning behaviors, that needs to be celebrated. And it really does help them to understand like they're doing a good job. It's different. And the expectation is that they're going to do the best that they can. And we're all learning this as we go. Adults, kids, everybody. And then sorry, go ahead.
Sure. I want to echo your point. I asked my 8-year-old what was the best thing that has been in this environment for online learning. And he goes to me, having Play-Doh, because I'm able to do something with my hands that's quiet while class is going on. So it's not disruptive. You are absolutely right. And that's a common thing where they may grab their blanket or they may grab a stuffed animal, that it's not that they're disengaged. It's what they need to do to be engaged and continue to be engaged. We both had the same anecdotes.
Yeah. And I would say too, with the screen time issue, because I know a lot of parents are concerned about screen time and rightfully so, that because it's a necessary evil for parts of this process, that just to make sure as much as possible that outside of school time, they figure out ways to relax and calm themselves and self-regulate without screens. So if they were used to watching videos to relax or playing games on somebody's phone, that they get plenty of outside time, plenty of time playing board games with the family, reading actual books, that sort of thing. It's helpful because I know it's not going to be perfect right now.
Actual books. I love that. Okay. So what tips and best practices do you have for setting up our students' workspace to be conductive to online learning? So I think that you've given one example, right, which are these quiet tactile things. But what else?
Another is a dedicated school space. So for the answer to what this looks like is going to be different for every family, environment, and situation that there is. That a clear and consistent space for school, that where they're going to go, which is where they know what's expected, is important. For my kids, I actually took their closets and I lowered the shelf and I gave a desk chair, and they have little like classroom closets and they can shut the door at the end. And I actually thought at one point to put them at the dining room table next to me. It really would depend on their needs. Do they need me nearby for help with regulation of things, or are they a bit more self-directed? Like, who are your students? Who are your children? But even if you do a shared space, having just a bin that all the school stuff that goes in and it all lives together. There's no question about where school is. You take it out and it's time for school. And you put it away and school is done and you move into homework or for non-school related activities. Go outside and play basketball, read a bike. But to have that dedication of space and materials is important. For me, when I'm done working from home, I need to shut down my office space. And it's the same that I've noticed for them. They shut down their school space because they need that transition and break. So what is their place for it? In addition, this is this is a very concrete thing, but spill-proof water bottles, no food next to the computer. To have online learning break down because you spilled your glass of water over. I've done that to my computer and fried it. You don't want that to have to be an issue. So we've invested in spill-proof water bottles, and this is what we have as part of the school kit. It is next to the pencils. It is next to the scissors. It is next to the Chromebook. That all goes together. I also, when it comes to their recess spaces, their lunch spaces, I try to do lunch in the morning and what the snacks are. So it's not this continual grazing in the kitchen that they have school, and it's the same similar routine to it. Amy, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, the only thing I would add, and this is probably more for the middle school, high school kids, it is school. So minimize the other distractions too. Don't have your gaming computer up next door to your regular Chromebook for school. Don't have your cell phone out, because if you were in a classroom, you wouldn't be texting your friends in the middle of class while you're, and I, as an adult, am guilty of this. In many meetings that I go to, I have two screens up. I have, things going on. So some of it they have to learn, but yeah, try as much as you can as a parent to encourage them. Hey, you're in school. It's school. So all of those things are good things.
And then how can parents best set up their children for independent learning, as many parents are still working during this time? And how much supervision do they want from or expect from parents during online learning?
That's one, honestly, I feel like if you're little, it's different. Do you want to speak to the small children since you have small children?
Sure. Mine are younger. I do have a middle schooler, but just barely. We're just a couple weeks in. Though the top thing, what I remember, and I try to remind myself as doing this, which sometimes is hard for me, and this is what I do as a career, is that I am not the teacher. I am not my students' teacher, or teachers, as the case may be, that they have instructors who are really dedicated to getting to know your children, but not only who they are, but how they are, how they work, what distracts them, what sparks their interest and their passion. And they need the opportunity to do so. Students also need the opportunity to learn how to be online students. We didn't learn this. This was not taught last winter before we left for Christmas break. No one taught my 8-year-old how to sit and do Zoom calls and how to focus and be an online student. So as much as I can sit there and help him and tell him things, I also let him do things on his own. There's a lot of things that are really learned through not quite getting it right and having that safe space to get something wrong. And that not only includes the content that they're learning, but also whether I am, listening with my headphones to the Zoom call or whether I'm just kind of spaced out, that those consequences about what happens there will come into play, and I don't have to be there to police them. So it's that difficult line where I want them to succeed, but you also need to give them the space to figure it out on their own, and their teachers will help figure it out. Don't be afraid when there's issues to have your student talk to their teacher, and then be the second line of defense where you can go ahead and then email the teacher and say, I've noticed this is going on, that, my student has told me this is what's going on. How can I help? Or what is the scenario here? And to find out all the details and to further figure out what to do for that. But let your students go ahead and take the lead and figure this out. We're all figuring it out together.
Yeah, I was thinking before the call when I got the list of questions people submitted ahead. It's funny because we didn't rehearse this, but it's so true. If it were normal times, your child would get on the bus in the morning or get on their bike or get dropped off, and they'd be at school all day, and we would be doing our job. And we're still doing our job. It's just a different mode of that. And I will say, with my sixth graders, we have spent the last 2 weeks focusing on growth mindset and making mistakes and learning how to problem solve our own mistakes. And we read a wonderful essay by Ta-Nehisi Coates today about him learning French and realizing after years of studying French, oh my gosh, look how good at this I've gotten, but I'm not perfect. And there were tons of mistakes along the way. So it is a very important life skill for them to be able to navigate things on their own within reason. Like, obviously, if your kid needs support in setting up a schedule, if your kid needs to have, we literally have for our middle schoolers, they have like 10 different Zoom links a day on their schedules for the different teachers and for open Zoom, like office hours if they need extra help, and for PE and everything. So sometimes they might need a little support in getting organized. But help them learn the supports and help them learn the ways to get organized as much as possible so that they can take that ownership.
So one final question. Oh, I'm sorry. Please go ahead, Joanne.
Oh, sure. Last point is that this has always actually been happening. We as parents have never been in the schools, in the classrooms as our kids are. So they've all been figuring out with as teachers, just happens to be face-to-face as opposed to online. This has always been going on. This is the first time that we as parents have simultaneously had windows into what they're doing it and how they're doing it. They've got this more than we think they do.
That's a good reminder. My last question is about accommodations. So where can parents turn if their student has special considerations that may make virtual learning environments even more difficult? For example, parents of special education students or the parent of an ESL student or one who has ADHD and is struggling with online learning.
That is such a good question. And I sent some resources to the Underwood team so that they can send them out afterwards, because there are some very specific, helpful resources, particularly from the National Education Association and from ISB, the Illinois State Board of Education. And in particular, ISB has an FAQ page that's for parents of special ed students, and then they also have a larger parent guide for parents of special ed students. And because of that question, I highlighted this one little part of the FAQ that I'm just going to read because I think they say it much better than I could say it. But it says parents should reach out to the child's school if there are concerns regarding the ability to support remote learning. Special education teachers are IEP teams, and that counts for 504s too, obviously. They're a different level of the law, but it counts for both. They can discuss ways to support the child and parents. Schools can provide training to parents, make recommendations for support, such as assistive technology. And there is a lot of assistive technology. There is a lot of stuff out there, particularly that's been being allowed for us to use for free during the pandemic, and there are a lot of resources. And this is important, especially for parents who do have IEPs and 504s with their children. They can revise other accommodations and supports contained in the IEP. Parents can communicate information to caregivers if someone else watches their child during the day or helps their child during the day, so that they have permission to access those resources too. And also, if you do have an EL child, an English language learner, their parents with students of disabilities, in particular, if you speak a different language than English, there are resources in the school district that they can access to translate anything for students. And I will just say, as a classroom teacher, I take advantage of a lot of resources, and we're learning and getting new resources every day. One of the things that I am doing on a regular basis is using commonlit.org, which has the ability, if you put a PDF of any document or any story or any novel or any whatever, it will read aloud to you if that helps. A lot of kids who have dyslexia or ADHD, that's incredibly helpful. It will translate a PDF into 17 different languages. It will do guided reading for things that it has in its database, and its database is really extensive. That's just one resource. So I know remote learning, especially if you have children with special needs, is really, really stressful. And it's hard. You know, I have kids who have ADHD and they sit on a bouncy like ball the entire class. And it's like the most adorable thing to me to watch them, you know, it's kind of, they're cute, but it's something that helps them to focus. And your teachers, I will say, are trained in this. We want to accommodate your kids. We want to make sure that your kids have the best learning that they can. And we're willing to do what it takes, but definitely talk to your school district because there are a lot of resources and you will get the links to those ISB resources too.
Amazing. Thanks. Joanne, anything to add?
No, Amy summed it up very nicely there. Special education is not my wheelhouse. Amy has much more experience in that than I do.
Amazing. Well, thank you both so much for joining us and sharing your expertise tonight. We really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next discussion is going to focus, on the emotional and physical well-being of children and parents. I've been in contact with superintendents, teachers, and parents all across our district, and one of the major concerns that they have for children is how they are coping with the emotional toll of COVID-19, as well as how to help them stay active when they're spending so much time indoors and missing out on school activities such as gym and sports, phys ed, if you will. Okay, so that's why I'm very excited to welcome these next few guests and have them share some information resources for parents. I'd like to hand it over to Megan Pecoraro McCann. Hi, Megan.
Hi, good to see
you. She's
you.
a social worker with the Batavian School District, and Lupe Ortiz, the Youth and Family Services of McHenry County Executive Director. And Mark and Becky Fulmer, retired PE teachers, to kick off our conversation on emotional and mental health. So we're going to bring our panelists in. Hi, Lupe. Good to see you again. And then I think we have Mark.
Nice.
Mark and Becky. Oh, good. Hi. I'm glad you're both here. Okay. So what advice can you offer parents about how to keep themselves and their children emotionally and physically well while they attend school virtually? Let's start with Megan.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here with you all tonight. I think one of the most important things to do first in keeping yourself well, especially during this pandemic and related to remote learning, is acknowledging where you're at and where your emotions are during this pandemic, because we all have varying levels of comfort in like how social we are, and if our kids are doing hybrid learning, sometimes being at home, sometimes being at school, or full-time at home. And so by naming those emotions and acknowledging what they are is really wonderful to model to your kids as well. Another important thing to do during this time is practice self-care. So schedule in some time to do things that make you feel like you during this time, even though we're in the middle of a pandemic. Self-care is really important. And limit your exposure to social media right now. There's a lot of really positive things out there, but there's also a lot of stuff that creates like fear mongering and stress and frustration. So when we take those moments to do the self-care instead of looking elsewhere and letting other people's emotions impact us and rile us up, that's a really healthy place to start.
Thank you, Megan. Lupe, what do you think?
I would agree. I think that the best advice is taking care of yourself as a parent. I think, I run a virtual learning hub is what we're doing right now as Youth and Family Center is doing. And I've realized that the support that we can, I think a lot of the times parents feel overwhelmed of like, I'm not an educator. I don't know how to help them. And the reality is that we really do. We do know how to support them. And it's simple things like maybe, following a schedule, teaching them how to follow a schedule and following that structure. I think a lot of the times, especially with emotions and stuff like that, they need that sense of security. And I think that routine, that structure helps them and having them feel like they're in control of that. And so teaching them how to follow that schedule. What's your schedule? Let's put your schedule up. I know one thing that the Resource Center has done is we did little tripods, and we have their schedule, and we have their name, and we have their grade, and we have a little positive quote, and it's all about like the environment that they're in, right? And that they have that sense of control. And so, and also showcasing, I think the panelist had mentioned before, like showcasing their strengths and like what has gone well. I think a lot of the time, especially right now, we want to feel like we want to have a sense of control of something because there's so many things that we don't have control over, right? So I think as parents, and as a service provider, we want to be like, oh my God, we want to feel that sense of control, but giving them that sense of control and recognizing what's gone well and really showcasing that. And there's might have things that it's a learning curve. Some of us are in our third week and our second week. I know other counties are this is their first week back, and so it's going to be a learning process, and that's okay. And embracing that and making the best of that. Another advice that I would have is asking questions instead of automatically. I think as parents, we want to be like automatically give advice and like, you should have done this, or maybe you could do this, but asking the questions and figuring out where they're at emotionally, where they are, what is it that they're really struggling with. I think that will also help parents not try and guess that, but really listen to the child and trying to figure that out together. And feeling that, letting them know that it's okay to talk about these feelings, that we're all struggling. I think one of the beautiful things about all of this is that this can all bring us to, as parents, regardless of where you work, we've all had changes in either school, or work. And so talking about that and be like, oh, it's okay. And reassuring them of, I've had changes too in my, in my day-to-day life, and having that be something that brings the whole family together. And so using each other to embrace that and making sure that everyone's emotionally well.
That's great. Such wonderful pieces of advice. Mark and Becky, what do you think?
Well, I think if we can help parents by supplying maybe some guidelines or resources, and one that I really would like to share out because to me it's just a fantastic resource for parents to tap into is Shape America, which is the National Organization for Health and Physical Education. They've produced a program called Health Moves Minds, and they are sharing out a parent resource or family resources that parents can have access to. And some of the things that can help guide parents, some of the things that are involved are mindfulness, family activities, and parent conversation starters. So something that Lupe, that you were referring to just a little bit ago, a mind and body calendar. So it incorporates that mindfulness along with activities that not only the children can do, but also the whole family can participate in. There's even a family field day packet that can be used for a whole family opportunity to gather and actually have some fun and do some things. Self-care is really critical at this point in time as well, not only for our students and children, but also for us as the adults. This is a traumatic time for all of us. And so these are resources that everyone can tap into and use, not just geared just towards children, but also for the family.
Yeah, and we've put a link in the chat that includes a number of resources. So one of them is the one that Mark just mentioned, the Health Moves Minds resource. And then another option there is we have a page on our website that is social justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and social emotional learning. And within that social emotional learning section, there's a whole group of books that are designed to help parents deal with various social emotional learning topics. So this is mostly for young children, but what's great about it is there are YouTube links to read alouds. So even if you don't have the book, you can still read the book with your children using those YouTube read alouds. And it it gives you exactly what topic they're covering for each of the different areas. So if you get a chance to take a look at that, that's on that resource that we shared.
Amazing. Okay, so we have a few more questions that were submitted at registration. The first is, what signs should parents look for that may indicate that their child is struggling? And this is open to anyone who has thoughts.
I'll go ahead and start. I think it's important for parents to realize that every child is going to show that sign of stress differently. And so regardless if you have, multiple childs of different age and you say, well, they're my child and they're going to show the same signs, they're probably not. And so it's really, this is all, I think the other panelists mentioned too, like this is a really neat time to really get to know your child. And try and figure out what are their behaviors, and what's a kind of an odd behavior for them. But again, that structure and that routine will also help figuring that out. If they're out of that routine, then there's probably a reason for that, right? And so trying to follow that. Again, parents are the front line of, a lot of community resources that are out there. Parents, you guys are not alone. You guys are a front line though. So if you guys do see signs or anything, reach out to your school district, your social workers, there's a lot of community resources. So we can help you guys figure that out. But the sign is just kind of study your child and figuring that out. One of them that I've seen with the kids here, if they're just staring at the screen and not doing anything, like they're not really seem engaged, sometimes a lot of times like, well, they're quiet and, and they're listening. They might look like they're listening, but maybe they're not. And that means like they're confused. But it's also really neat. Our kids really show their emotions through their face. And a lot of them have been like, I have no idea what I'm doing. We don't have to say anything, but we see it. And so just studying those little signs, I think is really helpful, and talking to them. We don't have to guess that. As soon as we see a small sign, asking that question, what went right? And then, what didn't go so right today, and trying to figure that out is just communication through them. So.
Awesome. Anybody else? We got another question. Yes, go ahead. No? Okay. The next one is, what can parents do to help ease anxieties of children when they feel overwhelmed with remote learning?
I think that building off of what Lupe said earlier about normalizing the anxiety of remote learning, but also just during the pandemic, I mean, the anxieties that even fully functioning, healthy adults are feeling during this time, it's no surprise that our kids are feeling anxious over all these changes. So helping give them choice where they can have choice and following those structures and routines really helps calm them. But something that as a parent, we always try to do is take it away from our kids, right? Like, don't cry, it's going to be okay. Or don't worry, we're going to all get through this. Well, it's really great to show your kids that you're there, but also be comfortable with their emotions, even if it's a negative emotion of like anxiety or worry or just being overwhelmed, or like Lupe mentioned, that like flat face. That's okay too. But really being reflective with your kids and saying things like, I see that you're crying more often than normal, or I see that you're just staring at your screen, but you're not asking the teacher any questions. Being reflective with them is really helpful. One of the most wonderful resources that I've used as a professional and as a parent is by Renee Jane, and I will put this in the chat afterwards as well. And she identifies herself as an anxious child, but now she helps kids to stress better, is how she words it.
Oh, wow.
And she helps turn anxiety into a superpower. And so she calls it like, we can turn anxiety into a superpower of courage, confidence, and resilience. And this pandemic it could be an acute childhood experience for all of these kids, but it is also impacting to the whole world, and it does bring us together. So that's a wonderful resource for parents to take that anxiety in their kids and help them normalize it, help them sit with it, and then turn it into a superpower.
Amazing. Okay, so Mark and Becky.
Just to follow up with all of that, I think it's really important that we use the mindfulness tools that are out there and help students and children and ourselves understand when we're feeling that anxious moment coming up. And if we can start to identify that, then we have the ability to actually address it and address it with these mindfulness tools that are out there that we can tap into. And that would really be obviously very helpful.
Amazing. Sorry. Yes.
No, it's okay. I think one more thing that I would like to add, that it's really important right now with like social distancing. I think it's really important for children to feel a part of a bigger group, right? And sometimes that's hard through the screens, through the computer screens, but really looking out at your community and figuring out what is it that they're doing. I know one of our things in this, this section is physical education, and we have Mark and Becky that are the experts at that. But really, like there's conservation districts. Let's take the opportunity of, like, before the snow comes, on different things that they could do outside that could be safe for them, but still could possibly get them connected within the community and making them feel a part of a bigger group. And I think that eases anxiety, because they're not the only ones going through this, and they don't realize it because they're at home and they're looking at the screen and they're like, I'm probably the only one that I'm stressed about this. But in reality, if we can get them to connect with other kids in a safe manner, they'll realize, oh, other kids are going through the same struggles I am. It's not as visible through the screens, unfortunately.
Okay, so my final question is for Mark and Becky. Several parents have asked, how can we meet our students' need for social engagement? They've been saying for years to put down their phones and devices, but now we're more dependent than ever on devices to interact with one another. So I think that this really does have an intersection with, physical activity and movement and health and well-being. So what do you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really concerned about kids, just physical activity levels, period, which I know is slightly off of the question that you were asking there. And I would like to go to that. But I also really do want to talk about the physical activity aspect, because in this current setting, whether your kids are in a remote setting, whether your kids are in a face-to-face setting, they're getting significantly less physical activity than they would normally be getting in a regular day. And this is going to continue to have a cumulative effect on kids. So I think it's extremely important that parents are really cognizant of this and are really thinking about ways to get their kids moving. And we have included additional tools on that link that we shared for doing that very thing. There's one called Classroom Brain Boosts that work perfectly in the home because they're made for using in smaller areas. So if kids do have to be inside, they can be using those. But then also, as you guys mentioned earlier, we want to get kids outside right now as much as we can, because we're going to be cooped up here soon. So we definitely want to have that built in. And when you guys were talking about schedules earlier, man, I mean, really trying to give your kids some kind of a consistent routine, including time set aside for physical activity, whether it's outside or inside, and not thinking that if I can't go outside because it's raining, they can't do anything physical. Yes, they can. We've given you lots of resources for that. And then going to the actual question that you asked about social engagement. Mark and I were just talking about this yesterday or day before yesterday. A friend of ours had a really awesome idea that I would really like to suggest that parents maybe even recommend to their schools. And that was to offer a non-academic time for a Zoom or a Meet when kids can interact on a more social basis, because a lot of these kids are not able to see their best friends at all. And, this isn't probably that important for kids that are middle school on up, because they're figuring out their own ways to connect. But the younger kids really need ways to connect. And I think that the schools can help with that. And maybe right now we're not really thinking about it, because we have a lot on our plates. So maybe even a parental suggestion of, hey, could you provide maybe even just once a week when you provide a set time when kids could just come on a Zoom, and maybe we also offer a bunch of resources for community building. And so you can use these community building resources to get kids interacting and talking about things they like and so on and so forth, and sharing, maybe even doing almost like a talent show or what have you in that kind of a setting. I think that's really important. And I think it may be something that's kind of low on the totem pole. People are so concerned about the academics, which we all should be, but we also really need to be concerned, a lot about the social and emotional wellness and physical wellness.
Well, thank you. We have to move on to the next panel. But I mean, there's so much good information that you all are sharing, so much passion. I want to thank Megan and Lupe and Mark and Becky for their expertise, for all of this advice and the resources that they put for us in the chat tonight. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So our next discussion is going to focus on childcare and community support for parents. And no parent should have to go through all of this alone. And there are so many organizations, parent groups, and other places that parents can turn to for support and resources. My office has put together a page on our website full of activities, tools, games, and information that can be used by parents and teachers to support lesson plans or supplement online learning. You can download puzzles for your first grader that also teaches them about women in STEM. Or high school students can utilize the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery student program to learn more about important historical figures. I know there are people across the 14th district who want to help parents not only get through this difficult moment, but also help their children thrive. And so now we're welcoming Karen Zatz, a Naperville School District Parent Diversity Council member and Illinois 14th parent, Peggy McGuire, the YWCA Metropolitan Chicago's Director of Child and Family Development, and Peg Stalin, Illinois Legislative Consultant and past president of the Illinois PTA, to share on childcare and community resources. Now, let's see, Peg, I'm not seeing your video yet, so hopefully you're still with us, but I'm going to move to the question. Where can parents find childcare and community resources to support them during this transition back to school? This is for all three of you.
I can go ahead and speak to the YWCA. We have the Child Care Resource and Referral, the CCR&R for DuPage and Kane County. So in all of this beautiful and brilliant panel discussion, way to go, Congresswoman, getting the people on the panel there really were very wise. My heartache is for childcare, and how is that going to look for our moms, our families, and our children. There really is a shortage right now of good childcare options. So when parents are looking, the best place to turn is to go to the YWCA Metropolitan Chicago's website, and you'll get a parent advocate who will help you discuss your childcare needs and try to match what we have available in DuPage and Kane. And they also provide subsidy assistance if that's what you need as well for your childcare. But I think that's the very first stop when you're looking for childcare, is to turn to the YWCA webpage.
Amazing. Thank you, Peggy. Karen.
So I'm a parent of a 5th and 8th and 11th grader. So I'm seeing this through elementary, middle, and high school, 4 days in the second week in our district. And I'm seeing from parents delight that their kids are back in school, confusion about how everything will work, and a little frustration when the technology doesn't work well. And then to cap it off is when you're still haven't figured out childcare, or you're realizing in this first week that although this is so different from the remote learning that we had in March, many families, especially those with younger children, need someone who can support their child throughout the day in getting from Zoom to Zoom. And the quest for childcare is very difficult. One thing that I would suggest to families is that they contact the social worker at their child's elementary school. Often they have resources and connections to childcare that other folks won't know about. as well as look at community boards, whether it's the board from your elementary school, from your PTA, or whether it's local to your community. We see a lot of folks now who are starting to offer either some sort of tutoring, some sort of pod, or some sort of existing childcare. And of course, we're looking for those licensed childcare options when they're available. But I know that some parents are looking for creative solutions to cover part of their day. And hopefully reaching out to parents might help them find it.
Thank you. Peg, Fallon.
What I have heard from parents is very similar to the YMCA model. In fact, that's what they're using to create pods amongst themselves and have that common goal of what they want for their kids and make sure that everybody's staying safe and just within that group of parents and children together. So building off of what the YMCA said would be an excellent thing.
Thank you. Okay, so then how are parents helping other parents, and where can they find support in the community or from their local PTA?
So I
know.
Go ahead and talk about PTA.
Well, PTA is a great avenue for parents to find resources and parent education. I've given your office, your team, some resources for the parents to use. If they go onto the National PTA website, there's a section that's called Family Engagement. And if you click on the family resources, there's about 2.5 pages of links for them. I didn't want to put that all up in your website tonight. They stretch everything from how to be a parent with children learning virtually at home. There's a multi-language information about COVID-19 for them. We have resources about positive mental health issues for teenagers during this time. There's even information about apps for children with special needs. So I would encourage your constituents to look at our resources with PTA. The other resource that I've given to your office is from Harvard Education. They have a series called Usable Knowledge. I don't know if you're familiar with it or not, but these are tips for parents to use at home to promote social emotional learning skills using games like I Spy, going on a bear hunt, Simon Says. And they also give them tips for modeling behavior for their kids at home. So that might be an excellent resource for them to use as well. And the other resource that I gave to your office was Castle. It is located right here in Chicago, and it has a lot to do with social emotional learning, but it shows you how your school can make a social emotional learning committee with all the stakeholders involved. When social emotional learning is in the school, is embedded in your schools, children benefit greatly. So I would encourage parent groups to do that as well. The other thing that I would suggest is that they can form a pandemic resource advisory team. This team monitors the metrics, and I know you're going to bring that up later.
Yeah.
They're also supporting the kids and their families. This committee gets together and looks at the resources that are needed, and then they, as a group, coordinate the efforts. They work on communication. Communication needs to be friendly for the parents. Sometimes terminology just escapes us. So
yeah, sure.
They need help with that as well. Partner with the teachers to find out when's a good time to reach them and how to reach them. The teachers have got the Zoom screen set up. Parents are trying to reach them. Kids are trying to come in. Let's work cooperatively with your school districts to provide the best time for that. And technology sessions. I don't know about everybody else, but some of our caregivers are struggling with that aspect of it. So let's give them time to learn how to work these devices that the kids have, and of course, share resources. And then the last thing that this committee would do would be to transfer back to the normal school days for kids. So I certainly hope some of that information helps you all.
Thank you. Karen, did you want to add anything?
Sure. I realized myself a few weeks ago when I was trying to make the decision between hybrid versus online for my own family that I felt like I was the only parent who was contemplating an online option. And so I started a Facebook group at midnight one night. And a day and a half later, I had over 1,000 parents join me for a continuing discussion about what remote learning is like. And now it's a support group for families in the Naperville area in 204. But I encourage people that if there isn't something like that, to go ahead and start a group to reach out to other parents. And it's a great resource because schools are a little overwhelmed as a help desk right now. And it's a great way just to have someone who might be able to answer your question or just lend a sympathetic ear to like, yeah, this is a little challenging, but I'm experiencing this in our house too. And tell your kid we're locked out also. Also because you don't have that normal sense of dropping and picking kids up. It's a great way to connect to families from your school that you might not have had the chance to connect with before. So there are lots of groups like this, or you could start one. Other things that I think parents might look for are your religious institution that might have, I read about today, some funding for daycare and for preschool, park districts. Our library offers lots of resources, free tutoring, for example, for kids, as well as our teen center and other community groups that are starting to look at that issue of how we add the social programming on for kids to add on to their day. Again, where all those normal activities, as much as I'm grateful not to be driving my kids around, we also miss that experience, that rich life that we want our kids to have. And lastly, I think it's not all rosy for every family. I think families with both parents working, childcare challenges, special needs kids are still struggling and are going to struggle. And so I would also say personally as a parent, if you know families who are in this position, give them a call, send them a text, help point them back to their school where there are many resources for them. But just that sense of like, hey, I know that we're all in the same problem, but it might be more challenging for your family. I'm thinking about you guys. I think that kind of support goes a long way too.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, Peggy, last words. Anything else? Any other resources you want to offer?
Sure, and I'll put them in the chat when we go to the next session. But just to say that we do offer a parent mentor program that is free, that parents, the only requirement is to have a child birth to 17 that they're the caregiver of, and they get a one-on-one mentor that we provide through Project Help. And we also provide free workshops on every topic under the sun. And we have seen those support groups blossom out of that, and we provide it all throughout DuPage and Aurora. So I'll put Project Help DuPage in there, and I'll also put the YWCA's link in there, and you can just reach out to us for any resource. Really, will help you direct you to all these beautiful resources, as well as the mentoring if that's what you're needing. If it's everything from the technology and e-learning to vaping and discipline and scheduling and you name it. So there's supports out there for sure.
Well, thank you, Karen, Peggy, Peg. What incredible resources you have shared with our community tonight. We're so grateful for your time and for your sharing your expertise. Thank you. Okay, so our last segment is going to give you a brief update on COVID-19 in our community, including information most important to parents and families. So we're inviting in Mark, the Executive Director of the Lake County Health Department, to give an update on COVID-19 in our community. If you have questions for Mark, please type them into the Q&A box. So there's Mark. Hi. Okay, can you please provide us an update on COVID-19 with information that might be most helpful to the parents that are watching right now? Again, Mark is the Executive Director of the Lake County Health Department.
Absolutely. And, tonight, thank you again for inviting me. And it's so important to have these conversations, and what a great panel so far. I wanted to say is that we were doing so well back in June. We saw our case counts dropping, and then 4th of July happened. And unfortunately, we've seen a steady increase in the number of cases throughout the Northern Illinois region. In fact, all of your counties, Congresswoman, are now above what we call a 50 per 100,000 threshold. So that's Kendall, DuPage, DeKalb, McHenry, Lake, and Kane have all exceeded that. So we have seen an increase in the last several weeks.
And so as parents, we've received a lot of questions, including how to talk to our kids about COVID-19 and how to educate them about the virus. And so can you share some of the best information to share with kids about what's going on right now?
Yeah, and I think, any types of infectious diseases, whether we're talking about measles, mumps, the flu, COVID-19, we're always talking to our kids about the same thing. And really what we want to stress from all the health departments in your district is that the 3 W's. No, number one thing is that the first W is wear a mask. We just absolutely need to have everybody wear a mask. Secondly, we want people to watch their distance. So that's the second W. And then the third W is what we tell kids all the time: wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands. And so I think if parents follow the 3 W's, both themselves and their children, will help stop the spread of the virus.
That's so easy to remember, too. Thank you. So parents are getting an option for their student to return to in-person learning. What do they need to consider from a public health perspective?
Yeah, I think this is something that parents can go on a variety of websites. All the health departments have great information that's out there. And so they can go onto the website and just see what's happening with the case counts in their area. Many counties now have that information at the zip code level, so they can see even more tightly compared to the county level. They can always go to the state website, also IDPH, and look at the county school metrics and see what's going on, and looking at the different metrics that are out there so that they can make an informed decision. But I think all parents, if we go back to in-person or hybrid, is that parents really need to be vigilant and just asking their kids, what symptoms do they have? I mean, we've had a lot of staff, throughout our county that, came in with a sore throat, and they didn't think anything of it, but they turned out to be positive. So very few individuals that we're finding actually have a fever, but those individuals that come down with COVID-19 and have a severe case, they have many symptoms, including fever. So make sure they're just talking to their kids, asking them what symptoms they have when they're doing the self-checks, and because the superintendents and the school districts will really appreciate their honesty and assuring that they're not sending their children to school ill.
Well, thank you. Mark, do you have any other just general advice that you want to share with the community tonight?
Yeah, again, I think it's just, I thank the community so much because we've really made a huge difference in Illinois. We've really kept our case counts low. And so continued vigilance. And I don't think we can, stop thinking about a lot of our new cases are happening in the younger generation. So the 20 to 29-year-old group is where we're seeing the increase in cases. And a lot of those cases are related to private gatherings. And so people weren't following the 3 W's. And so we saw a lot of infections just because of those private gatherings. So be vigilant and stay the course. And we really appreciate everything they're doing.
We got a late breaking question for you, Mark, live. Someone just asked about the chances of schools shutting down if the numbers go up. And so can you just talk a little bit about that? I know that you're watching those numbers closely and probably advising folks.
Yeah, we're working. In fact, we had a meeting today with our superintendents. I know many of my colleagues are meeting with the superintendents, and we're all tracking that data. And we want to make sure that it's safe, not only for the children, but for the staff, as well as other individuals that are coming in contact with school-age children. So we're watching those numbers very closely, and we'll make recommendations to the different school districts as to what may need to happen in the future. But I have recommended, and I know my colleagues too, is that everybody should be prepared to go into hybrid learning at a minimum, but we may have to shift in and out of remote learning to in-person. But we'll go in phased. We always will start with, if we're in hybrid now, we could potentially move to in-person, or we could move to total remote, but you don't really jump a stage or a different model. So we're watching it and we're looking at it very closely, but we do want to protect everybody and assure that COVID-19 is not spreading.
Well, we're so grateful for the work that you do to protect our communities day in and day out at our health department, the Lake County Health Department, and all of our county health departments across the Illinois 14th District. And I thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us this evening. Mark, we really appreciate you. Thank you.
And thank you. And I just want to say thanks for some of the bills that you've put out there. And I just want to remind parents is that COVID-19 is something that's very important and prepare for potential vaccinations, but make sure your kids have all their current vaccinations now. We want to make sure that everybody stays in care. So thank you again.
And Mark, anything to add on flu shot?
Yeah, definitely. We want to make sure that flu shots everybody gets your flu shot, because we don't want the hospitals to be overrun with both flu patients and COVID-19 patients in case we get a greater number of cases of both this fall. So yes, definitely get your flu shot. As I always say, some people say that the flu shot is not very effective. It's only 50% effective. I can guarantee you, if you don't get a flu shot, that's 100% ineffective.
There you go. Final word. Boom. Mic drop. Thanks, Mark. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Okay. So thank you all for joining us this evening. So much information, so many resources, so many experts that we heard from throughout our 14th Congressional District. If you have any questions about the information that was shared during the webinar this evening, you missed a link that you were trying to get to, or if you have questions generally about our coronavirus resource guide, you can give us a call at our office, 630-549-2190. Thanks so much, everybody. Remember those 3 W's that Mark outlined. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Good night.